It is one of history's most incredible stories. In the span of a single human lifetime, the Roman Empire goes from a place that brutally hunts down Christians to the very foundation of Christendom itself. It's a wild transformation, and it all really comes down to one man, the Emperor, Constantine the Great.
I mean, to really get a grip on how huge this revolution was, you just have to look at where the 4th century started and where it ended. When the century opens, being a Christian could literally get you killed. The faith was illegal, forced into the shadows. But by the time the century closes, Christianity is the official state religion, and it's the old pagan gods who are being outlawed.
Talk about a complete 180. A persecuted minority didn't just find a way to survive, they ended up taking over the most powerful empire on the planet. So the big question is, right, how on earth did that happen, and so fast? Well, that's what we're going to dig into.
Okay, so before we can even get to Constantine, we have to set the scene. We have to understand the world he grew up in. And our story really begins just before his time, during a terrifying period known as the Great Persecution. Under the Emperor Diocletian, the Roman state was actively and brutally trying to wipe Christianity off the map. And look, this wasn't some random mob violence. No, this was a systematic, top-down attack. Diocletian's edict in 303 AD was basically a blueprint for dismantling a religion. The orders were clear: destroy their churches, burn their holy books, make it illegal for them to even gather. Christians lost all their legal rights, which meant anyone, it didn't matter if you were a senator or a slave, could be arrested and tortured. It was a calculated effort to completely erase a faith.
The brutality was just horrifying. The historian Lactantius, writing at the time, described victims being publicly executed, their bodies just left out as food for the beasts and birds. Now, you have to remember, in a world where people are constantly looking for signs and omens from the gods, this level of violence, it really sets the stage for a big change. If the old gods were letting this happen, maybe it was time for a new, more powerful god.
So, out of all this chaos and a messy Roman civil war, a new contender for the throne steps onto the scene: Constantine. And he's facing a huge military challenge, but maybe more importantly, he's also having a crisis of faith.
You know, Constantine was a pretty pragmatic guy. He looked at recent history, and he saw a very clear pattern. All the emperors who put their faith in the whole pantheon of Roman gods, they all met terrible, violent ends. They'd been tricked by oracles, let down by their deities. He came to a simple conclusion. If he was going to win this thing, he needed a stronger, more reliable god in his corner.
And then we get the moment that changes world history. The night before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. This is the fight that would decide who controlled the empire. Constantine and his entire army supposedly saw a vision, a cross of light in the sky right over the sun, with a message that basically said, "By this sign you will conquer."
So what does he do? He orders his soldiers to paint this new Christian symbol on their shields. And guess what? They win a stunning, decisive victory. The very next year, the direct result of that victory was the Edict of Milan. And this wasn't just some truce, it was a landmark decree. It officially ended all persecution and for the first time granted total religious freedom across the entire empire. Just like that, the terror was over.
But see, Constantine didn't just stop at tolerance. Ending the persecutions would have been enough for most, but not him. He began to put the full power and weight of the Roman state behind his newfound faith, actively building the church into a powerhouse institution.
And he moved fast. He ordered that all property seized from the church had to be returned. He started using the imperial treasury, the state's money, to fund these huge, magnificent new churches and holy sites. And he gave Christian clergy a privileged legal status, making them, in a way, a new arm of the state. He wasn't just tolerating the church, he was actively building its power structure. And his personal commitment, it was on full display for everyone to see. When he called together the first-ever Universal Church Council, the Council of Nicaea, he was right there, presiding over it. Witnesses at the time described him walking among the bishops and literally kissing the scars and empty eye sockets of the men who had been maimed and tortured just a couple of decades earlier. Can you imagine the symbolic power of that moment?
But all of this imperial support, well, it had a flip side. As Christianity rose, protected and funded by the most powerful man in the world, the traditional Roman religions began a very steep and what turned out to be an irreversible decline. Now, Constantine himself was actually pretty cautious at first. He banned some public animal sacrifices, which was a big deal, but he never fully outlawed paganism. He even kept the old traditional title of chief priest, Pontifex Maximus, as a kind of symbolic link to Rome's past. But he set a very clear direction, and by the end of the century, the Emperor Theodosius would finish the job, closing down every single pagan temple, banning all pagan worship, and even ending the Olympic Games after 1,000 years.
It's just like the historian Mircea Eliade said, the roles had completely flipped. In one of the greatest ironies in all of history, the once persecuted Christians were now backed by an empire that was starting to persecute the old pagan faiths.
So when you step back and look at the whole thing, what's the ultimate legacy of this incredible revolution? Well, it's way more than just a change in religion. What Constantine did was create an entirely new model for how spiritual power and political power relate to each other.
This new idea would eventually be called the Byzantine Symphony. The concept was basically that the church and the empire weren't separate things, but one single Christian society, with two parts working in harmony. You had the priesthood, taking care of divine matters, and the empire, taking care of human affairs. That framework, it would dominate political thinking in the West for the next 1,000 years.
So, in the end, the 4th century saw a revolution unlike anything else. It was all sparked by one man's vision on a battlefield, but it grew into something so much bigger. Constantine didn't just end the persecution, he put the full might of the Roman eagle behind building the church, creating a new bond between the crown and the cross, a bond that would go on to define the next 1,000 years of Western history.
Which, of course, leaves us with one final massive question to think about. How different would our world be today? Our laws, our culture, our values, everything, if, on the eve of a battle all those centuries ago, one emperor hadn't looked up?